"Remember me, cowboy. I'm the Apache girl you saved years ago. I've returned to marry you." The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, open plains of the American West. The air was crisp and carried the smell of dry grass and the distant smoke from the town's chimneys. Jake, a young cowboy in his early 20s, stood near the edge of the ranch, brushing the dust from his worn leather boots. Life on the frontier was not easy. Every day brought hard work, unpredictable weather, and the kind of solitude that made a man both strong and thoughtful. Jake had grown used to the quiet, finding comfort in the rhythm of the land, the soft neighing of the horses, and the steady chores that filled each day. Despite his rugged exterior, Jake had a heart that was quick to care, though he rarely showed it. He had grown up on this land, learning to ride horses before he could even walk properly. He had learned to handle cattle, mend fences, and survive in a world that demanded toughness. Yet, beneath the calloused hands and sunburned skin, he had a gentleness that few noticed. Most of the townsfolk respected him for his skill with a horse or his willingness to help when trouble came. Still, there was a quiet loneliness to him, a feeling that something was missing from his life, though he could not quite name it. One early morning, Jake saddled his horse, Dusty, and decided to ride along the river that ran past the edge of the town. The river was usually calm this time of year, glimmering in the sunlight as it wound its way through the hills. Jake enjoyed these rides. They gave him time to think, to let his mind wander, and to enjoy the beauty of a land untouched by crowds and noise. The soft sound of water flowing over rocks, the occasional bird taking flight, and the rustle of the trees made him feel alive. As he rode closer to a bend in the river, he noticed something unusual. A small figure, barely visible at first, was struggling near the water's edge. At first, Jake thought it might be an animal, perhaps a deer caught in the current. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a young girl, perhaps no more than 15 or 16, caught in the fast-moving water. Her long dark hair clung to her face, her hands grasped at the slippery rocks, and her small body was trembling with fear. Without thinking twice, Jake spurred Dusty forward, moving with a speed and precision that came from years of riding. He called out to the girl, his voice steady but urgent. "Hold on, I'm coming." The girl's eyes widened as she saw him. For a brief moment, fear and confusion mixed with hope. She tried to speak, but the rushing water drowned her words. Jake reached the edge of the river, threw his reins to Dusty, and waded into the cold water. The current tugged at him, but he pressed forward, focusing entirely on the girl. "Grab my hand," he shouted, extending his arm as far as he could. The girl stretched her small hand toward him, shivering with the effort. With one strong pull, he lifted her from the water, holding her close to shield her from the icy current. Her teeth chattered, and she clung to him as if he were the only thing keeping her safe. Once they reached the shore, Jake sat down on the damp ground, keeping her wrapped against his chest. The girl's eyes were wide with a mix of fear and awe. She was an Apache girl, dressed in simple clothing made by her family, and her face was marked by the dirt and scratches from the fall. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, his voice gentle. He could see the shivers still running through her body. The girl nodded, though she could not speak well in English. She only whispered a single word in her native language, which Jake did not understand. But her eyes spoke volumes, gratitude, relief, and a strange spark of something more. Jake helped her to her feet and walked her a short distance away from the river. He noticed a small leather pouch tied to her belt, containing what looked like personal belongings. She clutched it tightly, as if it were her lifeline. Jake didn't pry. He knew she had a story, and perhaps one day she would tell it. For now, she needed warmth and rest. "Here," he said, pointing to his horse. "You can ride with me. I'll take you somewhere safe." The girl hesitated, looking at the horse with wide, cautious eyes. She had never been far from her home and probably had never ridden a horse with anyone but her family. But something about Jake inspired trust. Slowly, She climbed onto Dusty's back behind him, holding on tightly. Jake mounted as well, steadying himself and the girl as they set off along the trail. The ride was quiet at first, each lost in their own thoughts. Jake kept one hand on the reins and glanced back at the girl, who stared at the river, her eyes thoughtful and distant. There was a wisdom in her gaze beyond her years. She seemed to understand that life could be dangerous, yet she had survived. Jake could not help but feel a strange connection forming, as if fate had placed them together at that moment for a reason. By the time they reached the edge of the town, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the streets in golden light. Jake led Dusty into a small stable, securing him and helping the girl down. He noticed her hands were still trembling, her lips slightly blue from the cold, and he knew she needed warmth and care. "I'll take you to the sheriff," he said, thinking of the safest place in town for her. But the girl shook her head. She did not want to go to the authorities. She simply wanted to rest, to be safe, and to understand what had just happened. Jake realized then that this was not just a rescue, it was a meeting of two worlds. She came from a life of freedom, close to nature and steeped in her tribe's traditions. He lived in a world of rules, towns, and the constant struggle to survive in the frontier. Yet in this moment, their worlds had collided in the most human way possible, through courage, kindness, and care. He offered her some water from his canteen and a piece of bread he had in his saddlebag. She took it hesitantly, then with more confidence as she realized she could trust him. Jake watched her, noticing the small details. The way her fingers brushed her hair, the way her eyes followed his movements, and the way she seemed to understand without words. After a while, he decided to take her to the edge of the town, where he knew a kind woman ran a small boarding house. She could offer food, warmth, and a place to stay until they figured out her next steps. As they walked together, Jake noticed that the girl occasionally glanced at him, a faint smile appearing as she realized she was safe. At the boarding house, the woman welcomed them warmly, her eyes widening slightly when she saw the girl. Jake explained briefly, keeping it simple. "I found her near the river. She needs help. Can you take care of her?" The woman nodded, leading the girl inside. Jake stayed for a moment, watching as the girl's shoulders relaxed. He could see the weight of fear lifting, replaced by curiosity and a glimmer of hope. He knew that this moment, this act of helping someone in need, was something he would never forget. Before he left, the girl stepped forward and placed her small hand on his arm. She looked at him, eyes wide and bright, and whispered a word he could not understand. But the meaning was clear: gratitude, trust, and something deeper, a bond formed in the quiet bravery of that morning. Jake nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I'll remember this day," he said softly, and in his heart he felt a strange certainty that their paths would cross again someday. He rode back to the ranch, Dusty's hooves echoing on the hard-packed trail. The wind carried the scent of the river, the grass, and a new beginning. Jake could not stop thinking about the girl, her courage, and the life they had briefly shared in that critical moment. The sun climbed higher, promising warmth and light, and Jake felt a strange mixture of hope and anticipation. For the first time in years, he understood that even in the harsh and unforgiving frontier, moments of kindness and courage could create bonds that lasted far longer than the instant they were formed. And though he did not yet know her name, Jake knew he would never forget the day he saved the Apache girl by the river, a day that would shape the rest of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. Years passed, and the memory of that day by the river never left Jake. Life on the frontier continued in its steady rhythm, with long days spent tending cattle, fixing fences, and riding across the endless plains. Jake grew taller, stronger, and more skilled with each passing year, earning the respect of the townspeople. People admired his courage, especially the story of how he had saved a young girl from the river, though they never knew the full truth, that the girl had disappeared as quickly as she had appeared, leaving only a small feather as a token of gratitude. Jake kept the feather in a small leather pouch, always close to him. It reminded him of that fleeting moment, the bravery of the girl, and the connection they had shared. It was a secret, something he did not speak of to anyone. Sometimes, when he felt lonely during the quiet evenings, he would hold it and remember her face, bright, frightened, yet full of strength. It was a bittersweet memory, both comforting and painful, because he did not know what had become of her. Meanwhile, far from the town, the girl, whose name was Ayana, continued her life with her Apache tribe. Those early teenage years had been difficult. The tribe had its own traditions and challenges, and life in the wilderness demanded courage, resilience, and intelligence. Ayana grew into a strong, determined young woman, learning to hunt, track, and navigate the land. She remembered Jake vividly, the way he had risked his life to save hers. In her heart, that memory became a guiding light, teaching her that bravery and kindness could exist even in a harsh world. Ayana often told stories of the young cowboy to her younger siblings. She described him as someone noble, someone who cared for others even at great risk to himself. In her mind, he represented the idea of a protector, not only in the physical sense, but also in the way he had inspired hope and courage in her. She did not forget the feather he had given her, a symbol of that moment, and she treasured it as one of her most precious belongings. Back in the town, Jake continued his work but felt an emptiness he could not fill. Many of his friends married and started families, but he remained alone. He tried to focus on the ranch, on the horses, and on the small joys of frontier life, yet the memory of the girl lingered. Sometimes when he passed the river where he had rescued her, he would stop and imagine her standing on the bank, smiling and waving. It felt foolish, even to him, but it was a comforting thought. Years turned slowly into more years, and one thing became clear to Jake. The memory of that day had shaped him. He had become more patient, more thoughtful, and more aware of the fragility of life. He treated others with kindness and compassion, whether it was a neighbor in need or a stranger passing through town. In a way, that single act of saving a life had taught him a lesson he would carry forever. Every small act of courage, no matter how fleeting, could leave a lasting mark. Meanwhile, Ayana's life continued to grow richer and more complex. She learned the ways of her tribe, understanding the importance of family, loyalty, and respect for nature. She became skilled in traditional crafts, storytelling, and survival. The memory of Jake, though distant, was always present. Sometimes she would dream of him, imagining what kind of man he had become, whether he still lived near the river, and if he remembered her. These thoughts often brought a smile to her face and a warmth to her heart, even in the hardest moments of life. But life was not without its challenges for Ayana. She faced moments of danger, hunger, and uncertainty. She saw hardships that made her stronger, but also reminded her of the value of courage. Every trial she overcame made the memory of Jake even more significant. She remembered the bravery he had shown and used it as inspiration to face her own challenges. It became a personal motto: courage and kindness could change lives. As the years went on, the world around both of them changed slowly. The town where Jake lived grew, with more settlers arriving, new buildings constructed, and the occasional excitement of a traveling show or market. Life was still hard, but there was a sense of progress. Jake became known not just for his skill and bravery but also for his integrity. People trusted him, and his reputation as a reliable, strong, and kind man spread. Yet he always felt that something, or someone, was missing from his life. Ayana, meanwhile, began to realize that her feelings for the young cowboy who had saved her had grown into something deeper than admiration. Though they had only met briefly, that single encounter had shaped her understanding of love, trust, and connection. She thought about him often, imagining what it would be like to meet him again, to speak to him, and to show him the person she had become. She promised herself that someday, if fate allowed, she would return and see him once more. Time passed in quiet anticipation. Jake continued his routine on the ranch, always remembering the girl by the river, holding the feather as a talisman of hope and memory. Yana honed her skills, became wise in the ways of her people, and kept alive the promise in her heart to meet the cowboy again. Each of them lived fully in their own world, yet their lives were secretly connected by that single, brave act of courage years ago. One evening, as Jake sat by the fire in the small cabin he called home, he thought about the river. The flames flickered and shadows danced on the walls. Memories of the girl, the fear in her eyes, the relief when he pulled her from the water, and the small, meaningful smile she gave him before leaving, filled his mind. He wondered who she had become, what life she led, and whether she ever thought of him. The thought brought a mix of sadness and hope, a reminder that life could separate people but never truly erase meaningful moments. At the same time, far away, Yana sat beneath the stars, looking out over the rolling plains. She held the feather that Jake had given her, brushing it gently between her fingers. She thought about the cowboy, imagining his life, wondering if he still thought of her, and hoping that someday their paths would cross again. That hope became a quiet fire in her heart, motivating her, comforting her, and reminding her that even across years and distance, connection could endure. In this way, both Jake and Ayana lived their lives shaped by a memory, a single act of courage, and a bond that had been formed in an instant but would last a lifetime. Neither knew exactly when or how their paths would meet again, but each carried the memory forward, quietly letting it influence their choices, their actions, and their dreams. Jake continued to rise with the sun each morning, tending the land, caring for the animals, and living with the sense that something significant had touched his life once, and that perhaps it would touch him again. Yana moved through her days with confidence and grace, skilled, wise, and always carrying the hope that one day she would see the cowboy again. And so, life continued, each living fully, each facing challenges, joys, and sorrows, yet connected invisibly by the shared memory of a river, a rescue, and the bond of two young hearts who had once crossed paths in a world that was vast, unpredictable, and full of possibilities. Years had passed quietly in the small frontier town where Jake lived. The town had grown slowly but steadily, with new families moving in, new shops opening, and the occasional traveler bringing news of the wider world. Jake had grown older, stronger, and wiser. His hair was darker now, his hands rougher from years of hard work, but the kindness in his heart had only deepened. He spent his days caring for the ranch, helping neighbors when they needed a hand, and keeping the routines of life steady. Yet even in the midst of his busy days, a memory lingered that never faded, the memory of a girl by the river, the girl he had saved so many years ago. On a cool spring morning, as the sun spread golden light across the plains, Jake went to the general store to pick up supplies for the ranch. The air was filled with the sound of horses and the chatter of townspeople. Children ran along the dirt roads, laughing and playing, while adults discussed crops, cattle, and weather. Jake greeted familiar faces with a nod or a tip of his hat, but his mind was elsewhere. He could not shake the memory of the girl, the small feather he kept in his pouch, and the feeling that perhaps their story was not yet finished. When he returned to his cabin, he found something unusual waiting for him. A letter neatly folded and placed on his doorstep caught his attention immediately. The handwriting was delicate, elegant, and unlike anything he had seen in town. Jake carefully unfolded it, his curiosity growing with each word. The letter began simply, "Remember me, cowboy. I'm the Apache girl you saved years ago. I've returned." Jake's heart skipped a beat. At first he could not believe it. Could it really be her? After all these years, had fate truly brought them back together? He read the letter again slowly, savoring each word. The girl, whose name he still did not know, wrote that she had returned not only to see him but to reconnect after the years that had passed. She mentioned her journey, the life she had lived, and the hope that they could finally meet again. For a long time, Jake sat in silence, holding the letter in his hands. His mind raced with questions. How had she found him? What had she experienced in the years apart? And most importantly, what did she want from him now? Despite the uncertainty, a warm feeling spread through him, a mixture of excitement, relief, and hope. He realized that the bond formed years ago had never truly faded. The days that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Jake could hardly focus on his daily chores, his thoughts constantly returning to the letter. He made sure the ranch was in order, dusty, groomed, and ready, and his cabin prepared for a visitor. He wondered what she would be like now, how much she had changed, and if she would remember the young cowboy who had once risked his life to save her. Meanwhile, far from the town, Ayanna was also preparing for the journey that had been on her mind for many years. She had traveled great distances, crossed rivers, and navigated forests and plains, all the while thinking about the man who had saved her. Her heart was full of both excitement and nervousness. She wondered how much he had changed, whether he would remember her, and if the connection they had shared so long ago could truly survive the passage of time. When she finally arrived at the edge of the town, Ayanna paused for a moment, looking out over the familiar plains. The river where she had been rescued was not far, and she could see the hills where the cowboy had first appeared in her life. Her heart raced as she approached the cabin, clutching the small token she had kept all these years, the feather he had given her. It was a symbol of courage, trust, and the bond that had never broken. Jake heard the sound of footsteps on the path leading to his cabin, and immediately sensed that this was the moment he had long awaited. His heart beat faster, and he gripped the reins of Dusty tightly, standing at the door as the figure approached. When he saw her, he was struck by how much she had grown. She was no longer the frightened, trembling girl by the river. She had become a strong, confident woman, her eyes full of life, wisdom, and a quiet determination. Yet there was something familiar in her gaze, something that transported him back to that moment years ago. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, absorbing the years that had passed and the memories that had never faded. Then slowly, Ayanna spoke, her voice soft but steady. "It is me," she said. "Do you remember me?" Jake nodded, unable to find words at first. His mind raced through the memories, the river, the fear in her eyes, the relief on her face, and the tiny smile she had given him before leaving. "I remember," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never forgotten." They sat together on the edge of the porch, talking for hours. She told him about her life with her tribe, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. She spoke of the years spent growing stronger, wiser, and more determined, all the while carrying the memory of the young cowboy who had once saved her. Jake shared stories of his own life, of the ranch, the town, and the quiet moments that had shaped him. As they spoke, a deep understanding grew between them. The bond they had formed years ago had survived distance, time, and change. It was not simply a memory. It was a connection that had been waiting for this moment to be rekindled. They laughed, reminisced, and sometimes fell silent, simply enjoying the presence of someone who had shared a meaningful part of their life. Ayanna reached into her bag and pulled out the feather, placing it in Jake's hand. "I have kept this all these years," she said. "It reminded me of that day, and it reminded me of you." Jake held it carefully, feeling the smoothness of the feather and the weight of the memory it carried. "And I have kept it too," he said. "It has been with me always." The town watched with curiosity as word spread of the Apache girl's return. Some townspeople whispered, surprised that she had come all this way to see the cowboy. Others were skeptical, unable to understand how a connection from so many years ago could survive such distance. But Jake and Ayanna paid little attention to the opinions of others. They were focused only on each other, on the bond that had been quietly growing stronger with every story, every memory, and every moment shared. As the days passed, Ayanna became more familiar with the town, the river, and the land where Jake had grown up. She visited the riverbank, the site of her rescue, and felt the same mixture of fear and relief she had experienced all those years ago. But now, with Jake by her side, that fear had vanished. She felt safe, respected, and understood. Jake, too, felt a change within himself. Seeing her again, hearing her voice, and understanding the life she had lived gave him a new perspective on courage, kindness, and love. He realized that the connection they shared was more than a fleeting memory. It was a part of both their lives, shaping who they had become. Together, they walked along the trails, explored the hills, and shared quiet evenings by the fire. Every moment was a reminder of how far they had come, and how a single act of bravery could echo across the years. They did not rush, nor did they pretend to have all the answers. Instead, they allowed their friendship, trust, and admiration to grow naturally, appreciating the small joys of life and the rare gift of being reunited. As the sun set over the horizon, casting golden light across the plains, Jake and Ayanna sat by the river, holding the small feather between them. Neither spoke for a while, content simply to be together. It was a moment of peace, reflection, and quiet understanding, a moment that captured the essence of their long journey, their courage, and the bond that had survived time and distance. And in that moment, both of them understood something important. Life could separate people, but meaningful connections had a way of finding their way back. The river, the feather, and the memories of that day were more than symbols. They were proof that courage, kindness, and trust could endure, shaping the paths of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. They knew that this was only the beginning. The years of separation had prepared them for a reunion that was both emotional and transformative. Their story, which had started with fear and bravery by the river, was now entering a new chapter, one of understanding, trust, and the quiet beginnings of love. The days after Ayanna's return passed in a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and quiet reflection. Jake and Ayanna spent almost every moment together, exploring the hills, walking along the river, and sharing stories of the lives they had led during the years apart. Each day, Jake found himself more amazed by her strength, her wisdom, and the quiet confidence she carried. Ayanna, in turn, marveled at how Jake had grown into a man who was not only brave but also thoughtful, kind, and deeply grounded in the land he loved. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ayanna suggested they visit the riverbank where their lives had first crossed. The air was warm, carrying the soft scent of grass and water, and the gentle flow of the river provided a calming soundtrack to their thoughts. It was a place that had changed both of them forever, and now, years later, it held a new kind of significance, a place where the past and the present could meet. Jake led Dusty slowly along the familiar trail, allowing Ayanna to walk beside him. The river, calm and steady, mirrored the sky in soft ripples, and the memories of that first rescue came rushing back. Jake could see the determination in Ayanna's eyes, the same determination that had guided her through years of life with her tribe. There was a quiet power in the way she moved, a confidence that drew him closer, both physically and emotionally. When they reached the riverbank, they paused, looking at the spot where Jake had pulled Ayanna from the rushing water so many years ago. The memory was vivid for both of them. The fear, the urgency, and the relief of that day seemed almost tangible, as if the river itself carried the echoes of their shared past. Ayanna stepped closer to Jake, holding the small feather that had been a symbol of their bond for all these years. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both the river and the emotions she had carried inside her for so long. "Jake," she said softly, "I have never forgotten you." Not for a single day. Jake's heart quickened. He had thought of her often, wondered about her, and kept the memory of that day alive in his mind and heart. Yet hearing her words now, spoken so plainly, touched him in a way that he could not describe. "Yana," he said, his voice low, "I have never forgotten you either. I have thought about you every year, every month, every day." There was a silence between them, filled only by the gentle sounds of the river and the whisper of the wind through the grass. It was a silence that spoke volumes of trust, of understanding, and of a bond that had survived time, distance, and uncertainty. Iana took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something important. "I did not come back just to see you," she said. "I came back because I wanted to be with you. I have thought about this for a long time, and I know that you are the one I want to spend my life with. Jake, I want to marry you." Jake's eyes widened in surprise. The words hung in the air, both shocking and wonderful. He had imagined the reunion countless times, but never had he expected that she would return with such a declaration. His mind raced, trying to process the depth of her feelings, the courage it must have taken for her to speak them, and the love that had clearly grown in her heart over the years. He took a step closer to her, placing his hand gently over hers. "Yana," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I don't know what to say. I never imagined this. I always hoped in my heart that we would meet again, but I never dared to dream that you would feel the same way I do." Tears welled in Ayana's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief and joy of being understood. She had carried her feelings quietly, letting them grow strong and patient over the years, and now, finally, they were acknowledged. "I have waited for this moment," she said. "I have waited to tell you that the bond we shared that day, it has never left me. It has guided me, given me hope, and now I want it to guide the rest of our lives." Jake's heart swelled. He felt a mix of amazement, gratitude, and love that was almost too powerful to contain. He realized that the girl he had saved so many years ago had not only survived, but had grown into a woman whose courage and wisdom matched his own. And now, standing here with her, he knew that he had never loved anyone as deeply as he loved her. "I want to spend my life with you too," he said, his voice firm but tender. "You came into my life for a reason, and I believe it was never by chance. You saved me as much as I saved you, saved my heart, my hope, my belief in something meaningful. Yes, Ayana, I will marry you." For a moment the world seemed to pause around them. The river flowed quietly, the wind whispered through the grass, and the setting sun bathed them in warm light. It was as if nature itself celebrated their reunion, their promise, and the love that had grown silently over the years. Yana smiled, a mixture of relief, happiness, and love shining in her eyes. She placed the feather in Jake's hand, the same feather that had first symbolized their connection. "This brought me back to you," she said, "and now it will guide us forward together." Jake held the feather carefully, feeling the weight not just of the object, but of the memory, the courage, and the bond it represented. "It will always remind me of you," he said, "and now it will remind me of the life we are about to build together." As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink, purple, and gold, Jake and Ayana sat together on the riverbank. They spoke quietly of the future, of dreams, of hopes, and of the life they wished to create. Every word, every glance, every touch carried the depth of years, the courage of youth, and the promise of love. They discussed the wedding, a small ceremony that would honor both their worlds, the traditions of Jake's frontier life and the customs of Ayana's Apache heritage. They wanted it to be meaningful, personal, and true to who they were. They laughed at the idea of planning a celebration in a town where everyone would be curious, yet they were undeterred. This day was theirs and nothing else mattered. As night fell and stars began to twinkle above, Jake and Ayana stood, holding hands and looking up at the vast sky. The world felt infinite, full of possibilities, yet intimate because they had found each other again. The bond that had begun on the river years ago had grown into something enduring, something that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "This is only the beginning," Jake said, his voice quiet but full of certainty. "We have our whole lives to share, to explore, and to love each other. And I promise, I will never let anything come between us again." Yana leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady strength of the man who had saved her long ago and now stood beside her as an equal, a partner, and a beloved. "And I promise to be with you through everything," she replied. "To share your life, your dreams, and your heart. You saved me once, Jake, and now we save each other every day." They stayed by the river late into the night, speaking softly, sharing memories, and planning the life that awaited them. The bond that had begun in a moment of fear and courage had blossomed into love, respect, and deep understanding. It was a love born from bravery, trust, and the quiet patience of years apart, now coming together in a way neither had imagined but both had hoped for. As they walked back toward the town under the glow of the moon, their hands intertwined, Jake and Ayana knew that the hardest moments of their past had led them to this very place. The rescue, the years apart, the memories, and the silent hope, they had all prepared them for a love that was steadfast, enduring, and true. And in that quiet frontier town, under the endless sky, two lives that had once crossed by chance now moved forward together, ready to face the future side by side, carrying the courage of the past and the promise of a shared tomorrow. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and clear, with the sun spilling golden light across the rolling plains. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the soft sound of the river nearby. Jake and Ayana woke early, feeling a mixture of excitement, happiness, and quiet anticipation. This was not just a ceremony, it was the beginning of a life together, a life that had been years in the making. Ayana dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, woven by her family and embroidered with designs that honored her Apache heritage. Her long dark hair was braided and adorned with small feathers, including the one that had once connected her to Jake so many years ago. She felt a deep calm in her heart, knowing that this moment had been long awaited, and that the man she loved was standing just beyond the cabin door, ready to begin a life with her. Jake, meanwhile, dressed in his best cowboy attire, simple but clean and neat, with Dusty waiting patiently outside. He felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of years of memories, longing, and quiet hope. He had imagined this day countless times over the years, yet nothing compared to the reality of seeing Ayana waiting for him, radiating strength, beauty, and love. When they finally met outside the cabin, the moment felt almost magical. The morning sun lit the plains in soft gold, and the gentle breeze carried the sounds of birds singing. Jake reached out, taking Ayana's hand in his, and she smiled, her eyes shining with joy. "I can't believe this day has come," she whispered. "Neither can I," Jake replied, squeezing her hand gently. "But it feels right. Everything in my life has led me to this moment." The ceremony was held by the river where they had first met. A few townspeople had gathered to witness the union, curious but respectful of the significance of the moment. Some had heard whispers of the story, a young cowboy saving a girl from the river many years ago, and now that girl had returned to marry him. There was a quiet awe in their eyes, for it was a love born from courage, trust, and destiny itself. Ayana's father, a respected elder in her tribe, stood beside her, giving his blessing with quiet dignity. Jake's closest friends and neighbors formed a circle around them, offering smiles and words of encouragement. The officiant spoke with warmth and sincerity, acknowledging the blending of two worlds, the traditions of the Apache people and the ways of frontier life. As Jake and Ayana exchanged vows, the words they spoke were simple, heartfelt, and full of meaning. "I promise to care for you, to respect you, and to love you every day of my life," Jake said. Ayanna responded, "I promise to walk beside you, to share my life with you, and to honor the bond we have shared for so many years." They exchanged rings, small but meaningful, symbols of a commitment that had been waiting for years to be made. The feather, once a symbol of their first encounter, was placed near the altar as a reminder of courage, trust, and the bond that had endured time and distance. When the officiant declared them married, Jake and Ayanna embraced, feeling a joy that words could never fully capture. The crowd cheered, but for them, the world seemed quiet, as if it too celebrated the moment. They had found each other against the odds, and now nothing could separate them. After the ceremony, the couple walked along the river, hand in hand, sharing quiet conversation and laughter. They spoke of their hopes, dreams, and plans for the future, knowing that they had each found a partner who understood them completely. Jake promised to teach Ayanna all he knew about ranch life, and she promised to share the wisdom and traditions of her people. Together, they envisioned a life where both worlds could blend, full of respect, love, and shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Ayanna settled into life together on the ranch. They worked side by side, tending the animals, planting gardens, and caring for the land. Jake showed her how to ride Dusty with skill and confidence, while Ayanna taught him the ways of the wilderness, from tracking animals to understanding the signs of the land. They learned from each other, growing stronger not only individually, but also as a team. Evenings were the most cherished time of day. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. Jake loved listening to Ayanna recount tales from her tribe, stories of courage, wisdom, and the beauty of nature. Ayanna enjoyed hearing Jake's stories of the town, the ranch, and the quiet moments that had shaped his life. In these moments, they felt complete, connected by love, trust, and mutual respect. As the months passed, they began to plan small gatherings with the townspeople, celebrating the blending of their lives and cultures. The community grew to respect and admire their partnership, seeing in it an example of courage, patience, and enduring love. Children would come to hear stories of the river, of the rescue, and of the feather that had once united two young hearts. Jake and Ayanna would smile, knowing that the story of their bond could inspire others to be brave, kind, and faithful to their own hearts. The seasons changed, as they always did on the frontier. Spring brought new life to the fields, summer filled the air with warmth and activity, and autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and red. Throughout it all, Jake and Ayanna faced challenges, as life always does: harsh weather, unpredictable livestock, and the occasional illness. But together, they met every difficulty with courage and determination, drawing strength from each other and the bond that had been formed so long ago. On quiet nights, they would return to the riverbank where it had all begun, sitting together beneath the stars. The water flowed gently, reflecting the moonlight, and the memories of that first day remained vivid. They often spoke of the past, of fear, courage, and the power of hope. And always, they were reminded of the single moment that had changed their lives forever: the rescue, the feather, and the connection that had endured through the years. Years later, as they grew older, Jake and Ayanna remained inseparable. They raised a family together, passing down lessons of bravery, kindness, and respect for the land. They told their children the story of the river, the rescue, and the feather, teaching them the importance of courage, compassion, and the bonds that can shape a life. Even as time brought wrinkles, gray hair, and the slower pace of age, their love never diminished. They continued to ride together, care for the ranch, and sit by the river at sunset. Every glance, every touch, and every word reminded them of the journey they had shared, from a moment of danger and bravery to a lifetime of love, partnership, and shared purpose. Jake often reflected on the years they had spent apart, understanding that those years of waiting, growth, and hope had made their reunion even more meaningful. Yana, too, knew that her journey had shaped her into the person she had become, strong, wise, and deeply in love with the man who had once saved her life, and now shared it completely. And so, life continued on the frontier, full of challenges, joys, and the quiet beauty of everyday moments. But for Jake and Yana, every day was also a celebration of courage, love, and the remarkable bond that had begun at the river so many years ago. Their story, which began with fear, bravery, and a small feather, had grown into a tale of enduring love, shared strength, and the unshakable belief that some connections are meant to last forever. They had found each other, not by chance, but because courage and kindness had guided them to the moment they were always meant to share. And under the endless sky, beside the gentle river, Jake and Ayana lived their lives in quiet happiness, their hearts full, their spirits intertwined, and their love a shining example of how a single act of bravery can change lives forever.